As promised, I will bring witnesses before you. Witnesses who will speak on Jesus' behalf to you, the jury. So to begin, we call the witness stand Matthew, also called Levi. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
According to these records we have, you are a tax collector for the Roman government.
I was a tax collector.
As such, you were hired to sit at a toll booth along the road leading from the Sea of Tiberias, also called Galilee. There you collected a set tax for the fish or the merchandise that would be taken to market. Your employer had already paid the tax based on the contract with the Romans and was allowed to charge a certain amount extra for profit. He then hired people like you to collect the tax plus the profit. Is this correct?
Yes.
It is well known that corruption was rampant in this system. Both the owner of the contract and the person in your position, Matthew, the collector of the tax, overcharged and skimmed off the top. So in addition to that, since you represented the Roman oppressors, you were hardly popular. Yet, sneers were a small price to pay for the comfortable living that you could afford profiteering from this scheme. And besides, you did have other friends, other sinners.
Well, we weren't all like that.
But, as to the day in question, you were sitting in your tax booth, and this man, this Jesus, he comes up to you out of the blue and says, "Follow me." And you dropped everything, and you followed him. Is that correct?
Yes.
Had you ever met him before? Had any dealings with him? Heard him preach?
No, but in the work I did, I would usually catch the latest news. And this Jesus, everyone was talking about the wonderful rabbi who preached about God's concern for all people, healing the sick, and best of all, he accepted people who others neglected. So when he looked at me, peering, it seemed, into my very soul, and he didn't turn away in disgust, but rather looked at me with love and acceptance, well, I simply couldn't resist his call.
Well, I'm sure that was a moving experience, but let's move on. I understand you invited him to your home for dinner, and he accepted, and there were other guests at this dinner as well. Religious types, maybe priests, rabbis?
Not exactly. When people heard that Jesus was coming to my house, of all places, they just sort of invited themselves along. There were people like me, other tax collectors, business associates, people who did the kinds of work that made them outcasts, peasants who had very little time because they worked too hard to observe all the laws and rituals. And there were, admittedly, a number of prostitutes and thieves as well.
A so-called religious leader, a representative of God, surrounded by a house full of sinners. This certainly says something about this Jesus.
Oh, there were some Pharisees hanging around the perimeter. I could tell from the looks on their faces that they were not pleased. They even asked some of the disciples why Jesus was eating with tax collectors and sinners. Oh, the scorn and criticism that just dripped off every word. But Jesus overheard them and said the most provocative thing. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick.
Why is that so profound? And what does it have to do with this self-styled religious leader, this ignorant Jewish carpenter who has been affirming sinners instead of telling them to give up their wrong ways and instead become observant followers of the law? He simply comes across as vague and misleading.
Oh, that is hardly true. Jesus' message, his entire ministry, led with a call to repent, to turn away from the old ways, to turn toward God's way. Plus, he went on to explain himself. He quoted Hosea, where God spoke through the prophet saying, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice."
And what is that supposed to mean?
From what I remember from learning with the rabbis as a child, that was God's condemnation of the priests of Israel, a judgment of their emphasis on performing perfect rituals rather than teaching the people how to fulfill the covenant, how to be God's people. God was telling the so-called religious leaders that they were to blame for the immorality and ignorance of the people.
Who are you to give me and this jury a lesson on Jewish history?
This isn't history. It speaks today. Jesus was comparing the Pharisees of his day with the priests of Hosea's time. The Pharisees were following rigorous observances of law and ritual and demanding that everyone else follow that example. Yet they were failing to teach people of God's love. The letter of the law was superseding the spirit of the law, a law that instructs us how to be family, united with our Father and with each other in a bond of mutual, respectful, and self-effacing love.
I have heard just about enough.
If the Pharisees could have seen their own sin, the same sin that the priests of Hosea's time, then they could have joined us at the sinner's table. Jesus didn't come to build the egos of the superficially religious, nor did he come to affirm those who tried to save themselves by seeming to be good. Jesus sees into every human heart. He knows our sin is universal, and he calls into those hearts. He called into mine, and he said, "Follow me." He said that to me, a man whose heart is filled with sin, and I did follow him. I followed him to the cross, and he took my sin away. Your heart is full of sin. All of ours are. Even the righteous, who think they're being saved by doing everything right, follow him.
Heresy! Blasphemy! Slander! We need hear no more of this. Jesus calls to us. Jesus befriends us. Jesus saves you and me from our sin. How dare he?